Hello and welcome back to your second screencast of the year. This one is going to be on the scientific method. Now I know for most of you the scientific method is something that you've heard of for many years and many times and you're ready to just move on. Particularly if you had me, we talked about it a lot. So this really should be a quick review for you. The scientific method. As you look at the steps, hopefully some of them look very familiar and some of them might have a little bit of a different set of vocabulary with them, but basically they should be the same steps that you typically follow. Science begins with curiosity and ends with discovery. Science is basically this process of just gaining knowledge. That's what it's all about. That's why science is constantly changing. Scientists, as well as you, ask questions every day that you make through your observations. If you see something and you want to know more about it, internally you're asking yourself a question and you go through the steps of the scientific method in order to figure out what the answer to your question is. That's basically what the scientific method is. Typically in science, we tend to go a little bit more in detail on specific experiments and instances, but you do this all the time. Let's say you go up in the morning and you're thinking to yourself, okay, what do I want to wear? And you look around your room and you have a pair of dirty jeans thrown over the back of your chair, you have a pair of clean jeans that your mother folded for you at the bottom of your bed, and then you have a dress hung up in the closet. Sorry, I was talking about a girl. That's me. That's what I think about. So, okay, the jeans over your chair that are dirty, they're kind of comfortable, more comfortable than the clean ones laying on your bed. That part is your kind of research and background information. So the question was, what am I going to wear today? And your research and background information is gathering information and kind of looking around and seeing what you have. So the hypothesis that you might choose to think about would be, if I wear the dirty jeans, then will anyone at school know that they are dirty? So you're forming a hypothesis that then you could do a testable experiment on. That's really the biggest part of the scientific method and science this year, is making sure that we are performing experiments that are testable. If they're not testable, then we can't really gather data and we can't draw conclusions on it. Okay, so you want to make your experiment testable. Well, what does that mean? It means that you can't ask a question that can't be measured, or that we can't research within the spectrum of what's going on in a particular area. In other words, if I wanted to know what's going to happen in the lifespan of a butterfly, that is something that I guess I can measure, but that means that you would have to be able to track or follow that butterfly at every single instant of every single part of its life. And that's not really going to be plausible. So although it's something that, yes, I guess technically could work in the spectrum of our classroom, or really of reality in a human life, it's just not going to happen. Something else that's not testable would be if you were asking a bird what kind of food it liked. Now you can test which one it eats more, or you could test which bird feeder it would go to more often, but you can't test what it likes, because liking is an emotion and you can't get an auditory response from that bird. So now we've got the testable thing down. So we've asked ourselves a question, which we made through observations. It could be something as simple as an observation that you look across the room and see another student on their cell phone and you're wondering, why are they on their cell phone? You then gather information or research in order to figure out why they might be on their cell phone, and then you form a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a statement that gives the reason that you think something's happening. So typically, once we get to high school, we look at it as an if-then statement, but it doesn't have to be set up that way. You will hear a lot of the times that someone say, if that student's on their cell phone, then the teacher gave them permission. So they're basically giving a two-sided argument where it's what has happened because of this other thing happening. But when we look at a hypothesis in an experiment, typically we're looking at, this is what I'm going to do or change. That's your independent variable, which we'll talk about in a second. and then what the result you think will happen, or what it is that you're going to measure and what result that you expect. So in a second, when we talk about the independent and dependent variables, you'll see how they kind of relate back to the hypothesis, and they set you up for the rest of your experiment. So what are these variables that I'm talking about? Well, when you perform an experiment, a variable is anything that we are using within the experiment. It could be something that you're changing, something that you're measuring, or something that you're keeping the same throughout all of the different experiments that you're doing. So the independent variable, or it sometimes can be referred to as the manipulated variable, is the one that you, the scientist or the student, are actually changing. Now, I've heard that some people have started calling it the I variable, which I like because, one, it starts with I, so you can remember it, and you can also remember that I is the one that you or I am changing. So it's the thing that you change. So if we are asking a question such as, will plants grow in the dark? Our independent variable would be the source of light that we are changing. Putting the plants in different amounts of light would be the thing that I could change. The dependent variable would be what we are measuring. So if we're talking about how much those plants are going to grow, we'd probably use something we can measure like height to tell if they are growing or not. Now sure, there's other dependent variables that you could pull from that. We could talk specifically about the size of the leaves. We could talk about transpiration or the rate of photosynthesis of whether they're growing or not. But typically, looking at a very basic experiment, we'd use height to tell if the plants are in fact growing. So that measurement would be our dependent variable. The control variable, that's everything that's going to stay the same. Well, why do things have to stay the same? Why can't I do plants that are in the dark and that's it? Why can't I just measure 3 different plants that are in the dark and see what the different heights are? Well, you need something to compare to. So your control variable is going to be a plant that's in the light, or what typically happens in the environment. So if I were going to perform the experiment with the plants, I would have at least 1 plant in the light and 1 plant in the dark, and that would be my control group, the plants that are in the light. The other part of the control is keeping everything else the same in the experiment. So for example, if I were going to do the experiment with the plants, I couldn't use 2 different types of plants, because the rate of growth could not be because of the difference in the light, but it could be because of the difference in the type of plant. So that would need to stay the same. The amount of water that I was giving the plants each day would need to stay the same, because if I gave the plants different amounts of water, it could be the water that was affecting their growth, and again, not the light. So as you go through, the control variables are everything that you're keeping the same. When you're reading an experiment and trying to pull those controls, be careful, because sometimes they're not explicitly stated. It could just be that it's understood that those things have to be the same. So if you're having trouble pulling out a control, just ask for help. So after you perform an experiment, you basically have to analyze your data or look at your data. What does it say? What happened? Did the plants grow more or did they not? If you wore your dirty jeans to school, did anybody notice that they were dirty? Were you smelly? Were people giving you weird looks as you walked down the hallway? Okay, that is your data that you can analyze and think about. Typically in this section, as we're analyzing our data, this is where you're going to find the graphs and tables. And you might have a different type of graph or a different type of table depending upon what kind of data your experiment had. And then finally, we're going to look at all of that information and look at how you analyze it, and we're going to draw a conclusion. And our conclusion is either going to support our hypothesis or it's going to disprove our hypothesis. It does not always have to be that your hypothesis is correct. That's a big misconception that I've seen so many times, that people want to know, well, what is the answer going to be before it happens? Or they're so worried about making sure that their hypothesis is correct that they actually wait until the end of the experiment in order to write their hypothesis. Your hypothesis can be completely incorrect, but as long as you have the data to support what happened and to show what really should be the conclusion, it doesn't matter if your hypothesis is correct or incorrect. In fact, there are some researchers that prefer to have an incorrect or null hypothesis to start that they are disproving in order to prove their point. And I know that's a little confusing, but they do it so that it's not like they're stating exactly what's going to happen, but they're stating what they know should not happen. So after we draw conclusions, if we need to go back and repeat an experiment, we can. And our experiments should be written out so precisely that it doesn't matter who takes your data and who takes your procedure, but they should be able to do the same exact thing again and get the same results. And when that continuously happens and we're getting the same results over and over and over again, that's when we get what we call a scientific theory. Now, how are we going to share that information with other people? Well, we want to publish our work. So that's kind of the step that's added that we really didn't talk about too much in the past. We talked about communication, and you might have heard about communicating through scientific journals. Well, that's kind of the publishing part, whether it's on the web or it's in paper. You're publishing your work, you're giving to someone else to read and to re-perform. Because if it's actually good data, then somebody else should be able to repeat that experiment again. Why is it important to publish? Well, it's important to publish to make sure that you know that your work is being looked at by someone else and that someone else is repeating your results to see if it's the same. And it's also really important if it's something that's life-changing. I mean, think about if you had a question and you had a possible hypothesis on how you could cure cancer. If you did all this research but never published it and it was never confirmed by someone else, then we could have a cure for cancer just sitting in someone's brain or sitting in a laboratory, and it's never really being published to each other. So basically, these are the steps of the scientific method. I know we've gone over them before, or hopefully you've gone over them before, and now you're going to work a little bit with some of the different variables to make sure that you understand what each of those means. So go back and remember, independent variable is the I variable. That's the one that I or you will change. The dependent variable is dependent upon the independent, or it's the response to your independent. It's what we're going to measure. And then the controls are things that you can control that you can stay the same. Well, I hope this was a nice quick review for you, that you remember what the scientific method is, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.